So what were you like at school?
I was probably the reclusive person. You were like this is like the Wayback Machine. I was probably more the reclusive person at school, I must say. So when I was a kid, I was into computers at a very early age, before computers were a thing. Like I had like the world's first computers pre-Apple. I built my own computer.
Wow.
Um, and actually, for me, I like nothing more, don't know if this is good or bad, than to head home as soon as possible after school and get back to designing electronics. So when I was at school, I had my own electronics business
Wow.
and built circuit boards, which I sold to Apple in South Africa, and data loggers that would go down mines and the works. So I guess I was an entrepreneur before, startups were a thing, really. This was quite a few years ago.
What age was this?
I was 16 or
Wow.
so, maybe even 15. This was like in the 1980s, so way back. So, I mean, startups, there was no such thing as, fundraising for startups back then. There was no government tax incentives. I mean, it was South Africa. So I think one of the interesting things that I learned quite quickly that you had to run it as a proper business. In other words, you have to make enough
Make
money
some
to
money.
cover your expenses because no one's just going to give you £500,000. And I think that's been a very good discipline since then, in terms of running seed legals, as cash flow break even, sometimes up, sometimes down. But rather than you're going to raise lots of money and then
Yep.
hemorrhage
Yep.
lots of money, and then when times are bad and fundraising's difficult, then the company has really hard times.
Can I ask, do you think that's a generational thing? I'm a little bit younger than you, so I was born in 83. But it's almost where, so I'm still in the millennial generation, but it was almost where for a lot of my life, and especially I grew up in a city called Liverpool, but it was a fairly blue collar working class town. But it was almost where you had to pay your own way, feed your own, feast, I guess. And it was that balance of where, do you feel that because in the past 10, 12 years where interest rates and things have been so low, that we have a whole generation now of people that are 10 to 25 or so that grew up when entrepreneurship was cool and startups were cool, but
Yeah,
almost the approach was get an idea, fundraise, then do it, as opposed to maybe a few years ago it would have been make it work, make some money, then grow it. Does that make sense? Almost, one
Yeah,
is
no, absolutely. And I love the great, really democratization. Some might argue it's not quite democratization, it's moving the pieces around, but the board is still stacked. But I think it's very much a democratization. And that's very much my purpose and mission, both personally and at Seed Legals, to allow people with ideas, whether whatever race, gender, and so on, to be able to fulfill
mm,
those and build it. And once upon a time, Britain was classist. If your father worked at the mill, you'd work at the mill, and there was very little chance to break out of that.
yeah,
And then it became easier. Potentially, the stigma was removed, but it was harder logistically. You couldn't borrow money from the bank until you had money. And then, the rise of equity fundraising and then crowdfunding and now angel investment, which means that it is possible and without huge amounts of difficulty that if you have an idea and you can sell the concept and
mhm,
you can express yourself, that really everyone is now potentially a founder or creator. And welcome to the new creator economy. But it does lead to a different problem, which is I saw some survey that said something like 27% of people leaving school said they want to do a startup or be a founder, and that's up from 2% a
mhm.
decade ago. So the question is, and I see lots of founders, are 27% of people really founder material? So what does founder material be? And this is not to deny anyone the innate right to go off and be a founder, but when I think as a founder, key attribute is you have to love
Mhm,
making decisions
mhm.
and weighing up risk rewards. And if you don't want to make decisions or don't want to take risks, it's not the life for you. And you also, once you have an idea, you have to do everything you can to make it work. So relying on the handouts of others or going, I can't deal with this, can someone else own it? Are just not an option, right? So you've got investors to give you money, you've got people to follow you on your mission, and now you can't get up in the morning and go, it's kind of hard. I'd like to just, can I give my baby
Yeah,
back again, please? I'm bored, is not an option. So Yes, I think it's very important that as someone watching or listening to this, you look within. If you're thinking, should I give up my day job and become a founder? Of course, there is the possibility, and I love to make it super easy for you. You have to still find investment,
Mm-hmm.
persuade people to invest, but the tools legally to do that are so much easier these days. But the question is that going to fit your mentality,
Mm-hmm.
or are you going to find it, a constant frustration? And I look, for example, at myself when there are things like Brexit or Ukraine war or COVID. It's not to like gleefully say it's an opportunity because
Mm-hmm.
there are problems for many people, but your starting point is thinking the world has changed. It's not that, Twitter lights up with people frustrated with the uncertainty. In fact, uncertainty, if you thrive on it,
Mm-hmm.
cut out for being a founder. Anyway, end soliloquy on being a founder.